And I'm joined by Dr. John in the studio this morning from Creation Ministries International. Good morning, Dr. John.
Good morning, Mick.
It's great to have you here again this morning, Dr. John. Of course, we're answering questions that people text through to us on 0401 949 949. We've got a question from last week, and of course we also look at news stories that have happened over the last week. Dr. John, last week we had a question in regards to ice ages. The secular world claims multiple and creation scientists claim one. How can we understand the evidence that confirms one? Thank you. And also, I noticed in the news today, the Australian Antarctic Division have unveiled a drill that they tell us what the weather was like 1 million years ago. How about that?
Pretty interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
But is it true?
Yeah, well, I mean, the bottom line is they sort of count the layers in the rings, and we all know there was a big flood, and prior to the big flood they didn't have there was meant to be sort of a canopy around the earth, wasn't there? So of course the layers in the ice would have been very different sorts of layers.
Well, they would have, and you have to realise what scientists are getting when they drill out an ice core. What they're doing is drilling down into, say, the Antarctic ice, for example, and producing a 3 kilometre long, perhaps, very, very long little pencil of ice. And but that doesn't come up out of the ice with a label on it. Okay? What you have, the evidence you have, is a 3 kilometre long pencil of ice. And you then have to interpret that pencil of ice. And your interpretation is very much influenced by what you already believe about that pencil of ice. You see, if you think it represents millions of years of history, you will then examine it and you'll look for the markings and all the other little things in that sliver of ice. And you'll come up with an explanation, like the scientists are doing down there in the Antarctic, that they can see evidence that millions of years ago there was whatever it was that they described. But you see, if you happen to believe, as we do, that the pencil of ice only represents a little over 4,000 years since the flood, then you would examine that pencil of ice with a completely different mindset.
Yes.
And you would look for markings on it that represented time over the last 4,500 years, for example.
Yes.
You see, and you would come up with a completely different story. And that's exactly what it is. It is a story. It is an interpretation of a 3 kilometre long thin tube of ice. But that thin tube of ice does not tell its own story. You have to put a story into it. And that's what's happening. And it's very much influenced by what you already believe.
Yes, okay, so no labels. Oh, that makes it tough for them, doesn't it?
It does. It means you can put your own interpretation on anything.
Yeah, because I've seen the pictures, and they even put little cardboard labels on it, and they tell you what's on each sort of bit, and yeah, they obviously put that on after it comes up.
It didn't come out of the ice with those labels on it.
No,
very interesting, Mick. There's a lot of things in science that we really have to differentiate between. You see, when you're talking about scientific evidence, with an ice core, for example, the evidence is the core of ice. What happens then is the interpretation of that evidence, and it's a completely different thing. You see, when we talk about science, what we're talking about is all the scientific principles and theorems and various functions of science that put men on the moon, that give us our modern day communications and our electricity, our transport, all the things that we rely on every single day. And there's absolutely no problem with that type of science. You see, that's science that's testable, repeatable, it obeys the known laws of chemistry and physics. You won't find any conflict in the Bible with that sort of science. But when it comes to interpretative science, like we get with ice cores, then it becomes a very different thing, because people are able to put their own spin on just about anything that they come up with. And that type of science, what we might call, in this case of an ice core, historical science, that's a very different thing. That's scientific opinion. That's not scientific fact. And really, we need to differentiate between the two.
Yes, absolutely. Well, you are on 94.9 this morning with Dr. John from Creation Ministries International, and he'd like to answer your questions. Send them through to 0401 949 949. That is a text line, 0401 949 949. It's 14 minutes past 8. We'll be back with Dr. John. And we're with Dr. John from Creation Ministries International. He's answering your questions. If you have a question, please send it through to our text line, 0401 949 949. Now, Dr. John, we had that question that came in regards to the Ice Age. The secular world claims multiple and creation scientists claim one. How can we understand the evidence that confirms one?
Yeah, well, it's a very good question, Mick. I suppose you first of all have to say, was there really an ice age? And the truth is, everybody agrees that there really was. The secular world thinks that there were several, and they believe that there have been some cyclical variations in the Earth's axis of rotation that have produced ice ages. Creation scientists don't agree with that. They certainly acknowledge that there was one, and there's no doubt that there's plenty of evidence for that. And it probably lasted for maybe up to 700 years. But really, you can't look at the evidence and then determine how many there were. The evidence, everyone agrees that there's been at least one. But it needs to be realised too that it didn't really cover the whole Earth. We get the impression from the movies, you know, the kids' movies that you see on Ice Age and Ice Age 2 and all of this sort of stuff, that it probably covered most of the Earth. But that's actually not the case. At the present time, ice covers about 10% of the Earth's landmass, and that's mainly Greenland and Antarctica. And we need to remember that there really isn't any land mass in the Arctic area. That's just ice sitting on water. And you might remember that about 50 or 60 years ago, the Americans put a nuclear submarine under the Arctic ice cap. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I've seen a movie with it.
Yeah. The submarine was called the Nautilus. And you know where that name came from?
Yes.
That came from Jules Verne's his submarine that he featured in 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, which was called Nautilus.
Yep.
And I think it was an appropriate name for one of the Americans' first nuclear submarines. But Nautilus went underneath that Arctic ice and demonstrated that, well, they already knew that there wasn't a landmass there. But it's quite interesting that they managed to get under the Arctic ice cap. But anyway, at the moment, ice covers about 10% of the Earth's landmass. And it's generally believed that in the Ice Age, that figure increased to about 30%. So from 10 to 30. So a substantial increase, but certainly not the whole Earth.
No, but we did have a glacier down in the Snowy Mountains around Blue Lake, they say.
Yeah, I'm sure we did.
Yep.
And it would have been certainly colder here, but not quite an ice age. But look, I suppose it was mainly North America and Northern Europe, didn't extend to tropical areas, and certainly didn't cover Australia. But the question, I suppose, is how do we really know that there was an ice age? Well, what we observe today is that when you have moving ice sheets like you have in glaciers, what they do is they push rocks and pebbles and all sorts of rubbish before them, and that's called a moraine. And so we can see evidence throughout the world of quite large moraines where the ice sheet pushed the rocks to. And you get quite a lot at the end of where it was, and even at the sides, some very massive sides as well. So there's no doubt that those moraines, which are further, let's say, south than they would have been originally, they do indicate that the ice sheets were much more extensive in the past. We also know that they left some markings on rocks. And as the ice sheet scraped over the rocks, it gouged great gashes in the rocks and so on. And so that's evidence for the Ice Age. But the interesting thing is that the rocks that it gouged the gashes and so on in are sedimentary rocks. Now, what are sedimentary rocks? Well, sedimentary rocks are conglomerates of sand and pebbles and that sort of thing, and they got formed in water. And there's a significance of that too.
Yeah, there you go. So water first, then the ice. You're on 94.9 this morning. And Dr. John's been talking about the Ice Age and the carvings left in the ice after, those giant glaciers pushed through. And, of course, the sedimentary rock down below, which meant there was a flood before the Ice Age.
That's right, Mick. And it's pretty obvious that if there are grooves gouged in underlying rock, then the rock was there before the ice.
Yes.
And so because that is sedimentary rock, which is a conglomerate of sand and gravel and so on, then where does sedimentary rock come from? And of course it sediments out of water. And the clear evidence from the Bible is that that would have been Noah's flood that formed it. And the other interesting thing is that when you have a look at the gouges in the rock, they're still there. They're not weathered away, which you might expect they might have been if they'd been there for millions of years. So not only are they evidence of an ice age and a flood before the Ice Age, they're evidence that it wasn't all that long ago. So
particularly when we see things like the 12 apostles, of which there's only 11 now, and even the Skillion, seeing how that's fallen down in recent years, we see how quickly rock really does erode and break away, yet that's still there.
Well, you've only got to go down the M1 and cross the Hawkesbury and have a look at the cliff on that's facing you as you drive towards Sydney, and you see areas of new rock where rock has fallen away. So sedimentary rock does not last all that long. It's not terribly solid, particularly when it's exposed to weathering. So anyway, that's why we see that the Ice Age came after the flood. Well, secular science doesn't accept a worldwide flood anyway, and apart from the variations in the, or supposed variations in the Earth's axial tilt, they don't really have an explanation as to how the Ice Age might have come about. But creation scientists believe that they can explain it, because it's really not easy for ice sheets to extend a long distance. Even in the northern climates where the winters are cold enough, they don't really get enough snowfall to maintain the ice, and you need to have quite a lot of snowfall. And the snow does go away in the northern summers, because it's not so much the outside temperature that causes the snow to melt. Sunshine is one of the things that really gets rid of snow. And they get plenty of bright sunshine in the summertime up there in the north. And of course, secular scientists have to work on the principles of uniformitarianism, that what you see happening now is what's been happening for millions of years, without too much variation, too many catastrophes. Whereas, of course, if you are a Christian, you can see that catastrophism has happened in the past, and Noah's flood was the main one. And then the question comes, can creation scientists do a better job of explaining the Ice Age? And they believe they can. And this is because we do acknowledge the impact of Noah's flood on the Earth's climate. Now, the Earth's climate was probably very different before the flood. I think it was very likely hot, steamy, jungle type climate, and we know that there was massive vegetation because it's buried in the earth now as enormous amounts of coal all over the world. So the climate is clearly a bit different now after the flood. And bear in mind too that the flood was not just rain. You know, yes, it rained for 40 days and 40 nights, but the Bible tells us that all the fountains of the great deep were broken up. Now, we obviously don't know exactly what that means, but you would get a suspicion that something fractured the Earth's crust, and that allowed for earthquakes and volcanism and all of that sort of thing. So volcanic eruptions and the release of subterranean water was probably very largely what came out in the fountains of the great deep being broken up. Bear in mind,
interesting how in our generation they've actually proven that there's so much more water down there than they ever thought before.
That's right, and a fair amount of what comes out of volcanoes is steam. You know, there's a lot of water under the ground, and so that's what we believe, that there was massive volcanism that not only contributed to the water from the flood, but also continued on for many, many years afterwards, because we know that there are extinct volcanoes all over the place, plenty of active ones, but lots of extinct ones, and we've got many of those in Australia, you know, volcanoes that clearly were active at one time in the past, but are no longer active.
Yeah, there was one in the news just last week. They were talking about one just off the Great North Road here on the Central Coast.
Right, okay.
We didn't even know was there.
Yeah, that's right. But certainly evidence that they were once active volcanoes. So how would that have caused an ice age? Well, we believe that that would have thrown up a lot of particulate matter into the atmosphere, which would have blocked out a reasonable amount of sunlight. But the waters at the time, after the flood, would have been very warm. The floodwaters themselves would have been warm because a lot of it came from subterranean water, and that would have been warm from pole to pole and right down into the depths. It was all warm water to start with. So how does that produce an ice age? Well, warm water tends to evaporate. And the more evaporation you get and the more moisture you get up there, and the colder the weather over the continents, then the more snowfall you're likely to get. And that really is how we believe the ice age got going. Lots of snowfall, continuing to maintain the ice underneath the snow, and that ice extending further south, particularly in the northern hemisphere, and then gradually receding over time. So we believe the ice age lasted probably for about 700 years.
Yeah, interesting you say that, because just this year there was a warning in North America. There was a thing like on YouTube, people started throwing pots and pans of almost boiling water into the sky when it was really frigid outside, and it froze faster than just normal water. And they were saying don't do it because a lot of people weren't throwing it high enough and they were burning themselves as well. But interesting how that works. And now you're saying, yeah, of course, this warm water and, yeah, extra ice. Hey, if you've got any questions, you know, you can always go to the creation.com website. But if you do have questions, there's probably somebody else with a similar question. So we'd love to hear your questions. Just text those questions through to 0401 949 949. Now, Dr. John, I've got a question for you. I saw an animal on the internet. Now, first it looked like a cheetah, you know, the world's fastest cat, the cat that can go to 0 to 112 k's in just 3 seconds, faster than most sports cars. But no, this thing wasn't that fast. It was a spotted zebra. Did you see the spotted zebra on the internet?
I did look at that. Was a link that one of my friends sent me, and it really is great. He's a gorgeous little fellow. This is a zebra foal that doesn't have normal stripes. He looks like he's got polka dots all over him, and apparently this isn't the first time that's been observed. The mum's a normal-looking zebra, but he's a little black fellow with polka dots all over him. And apparently foals like this have been born before, and the suggestion is that they don't survive terribly well because they're more prone to being attacked by biting flies, which bring diseases. And the biting flies are apparently deterred by the stripes on the zebra.
Wow.
And I saw another very interesting thing in that particular article. One of the reasons why this little fellow is mostly black with just dots over him, apparently if you shave a zebra, it's black. So, so it's white stripes on black, not black on white stripes.
Wow, that's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, and the stripes apparently deter the biting flies. But yeah, clearly it's a mutation, and mutations like it does some damage to that little foal. And like all mutations, they usually wreck things. They don't make things better. You don't find genetic mutations improving anything. So mutations as a driver of evolution quite clearly are impossible because it doesn't work. They go backwards, not forwards.
Yeah.
So really, I think it's just another example of mutations not possibly being a driver of evolution. But look, I wanted to mention a talk that I did on Friday night up to a youth group in the Hunter area. And this was a real thrill for me. There were probably 30-odd kids there, ranging in age from about 11 to 17. And I'm sure half of them would have come from non-Christian homes anyway, you know. But I did it interactively, and I was asking them questions. Yep. And it was really obvious to me that there were a couple of young boys there who knew all the answers to all the questions I was asking them. And both of them came up to me afterwards, and they were obviously young fellas about 12 or 13 from Christian homes where they've been getting Creation magazine for years, and they knew all about it. And really, we've had lots of testimonies over the years from young people who've said how valuable our material has been in their schooling. You know, they'd be ducks of their school or topping the class in evolutionary biology and all of this sort of stuff, because having been grounded in the creation type material, they understand the principles of evolution much better than their teachers and their peers. Yeah, wow. You know, so they do brilliantly at school. And this is a message that I've got for Christian parents this morning. Don't ever think that learning our stuff and being grounded in our stuff is going to do your kids any harm at school. It'll absolutely enhance their schooling. You will find that they do far better having the grounding in our material than they would if they just stuck to the secular stuff. That's now, awesome. They have to do exams on the secular principles, we know that, yep. But if they've been taught it the right way from a creationist perspective, they will run rings around their peers and even their teachers.
That's awesome, isn't it? Wow. Well, I wish I'd been taught it when I was younger. I could have got a few marks in my HSC. Wow, well, that's sensational, Dr. John. Thank you again this week. And look, for anybody out there who does have some questions, of course, you can use the website, creation.com, or send the questions through to us. So as Dr. John can work on them for next week. And the number to text them through to is 0401 949 949. Thank you, Dr. John, for coming in this week.
Yeah, but next week I won't be here, Mick. They can certainly send their texted questions and you can forward them on to me. But I won't be here next week. I should be right for the week after, but I'll let you know.
Melbourne next week.
Melbourne next week, yeah.
Any talks?
Yes, I'll probably be doing a few.
Yeah, exciting times. All right. Well, you're on 94.9 this morning. It is 5 minutes to 9.